Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to this mini book podcast.
Glad to be here.
We've got, well, a whole stack of sources here. Really compelling excerpts from this book on OpenAI, Empire of AI.
Right.
And our mission, really, for this deep dive is to pull out the key bits of knowledge, the insights from these pages.
So to give you, the listener, a shortcut, right?
Exactly. A shortcut to getting informed on what's, frankly, a surprisingly complex and sometimes, well, unsettling story about this hugely important AI company.
Yeah, it really is.
We'll look at the origins, the people involved, some fascinating characters, the controversies, obviously, and the bigger picture implications of how they do things.
And importantly, it's all coming straight from the source material we've got in front of us.
Precisely. So let's start at the beginning. What's really striking, as you said, is this tension the book highlights right away between the initial vision for OpenAI and what it actually became.
Yeah, absolutely. The book talks about the founding, Musk, Altman, Peter Thiel, some other big names. And it was pitched as this, radical commitment. A nonprofit?
Explicitly nonprofit.
To develop AGI, artificial general intelligence, but for humanity. Not for profit, not for shareholders.
Yeah, the sources really emphasize that initial commitment. They talk about a $1 billion pledge.
Which is a huge number.
A stance against doing commercial products at first, just focusing on research for this, global utopia they envisioned.
And the name itself, OpenAI, wasn't just branding. It was meant to signal openness, sharing research.
They even apparently pledged to stop competing if someone else got ahead with beneficial AGI.
It sounds almost unbelievably idealistic, doesn't it? Like a grand declaration.
So the big question the sources seem to pose is how quickly did that picture start to, blur?
Pretty fast, it seems.
Uh-huh.
The book points out they only got a fraction of that billion they were pledged.
Really? How much?
Around $130 million total, apparently. And less than $45 million actually came from Musk himself.
Wow, okay.
And Musk left fairly early on. The source says he feels the nonprofit structure was just too slow for safe AGI.
And conflicts with Tesla, right?
Yeah, conflicts with Tesla work too.
So that's when Sam Altman steps up as president after Musk leaves, and the focus shifts.
Big time. The book talks about this realization, this need to marshal substantial resources.
Which basically meant they needed cash, lots of it.
Exactly. And that led to the big pivot the book describes, moving to a capped profit structure.
Still framed as mission-aligned, though.
Well, yeah, that was the framing. A way to get huge investment, like Microsoft's reported $10 billion,
right,
while theoretically keeping the original mission intact. But, it clearly opened the door for massive funding that changed the whole trajectory.
And the book traces how their public statements kind of evolved along with this, doesn't it?
It does. You see it move. From, open sourcing everything initially.
Which was the original open part.
Right. To then talking about API as a strategy for openness. Then the very rapid iterative deployment we saw with ChatGPT.
Which really put them on the map for everyone.
For sure. And then by 2024, Altman's quoted saying a key part of the mission is putting very capable AI tools in the hands of people for free or at a great price.
Huh. That sounds quite different from the initial nonprofit idea.
It does, though Greg Brockman, the CTO, is quoted in the source, insisting that these changes didn't actually shift the core mission.
Just enabled it, in his view. Allowed them to get mission-aligned investors.
That's the argument presented, yeah. But it's a really striking contrast the book lays out.
It really is. Founding myth, idealistic, shared, open AGI nonprofit, reality, commercial engine, massive investment, rapid product releases.
Yet the leadership narrative, at least from Brockman in the source, stays consistent on the mission. That tension is, a major theme.
And it wasn't just internal, right? The book notes their aggressive scaling, especially after ChatGPT.
Oh, yeah.
It basically forced other tech giants to react. Google centralizing labs, Microsoft diverting chips. It kicked the whole AI race into hyperdrive.
Which maybe wouldn't have happened quite the same way under the original nonprofit plan.
Probably not. Which I guess brings us neatly to the people involved, the key figures.
Right, the personalities and power dynamics. The book gives some fascinating glimpses. Sam Altman, for instance.
Tell me about him.
Described with details like culturally very Jewish, an optimist yet a survivalist.
A survivalist? How so?
Apparently kept a go bag ready, just in case. Fears about future viruses or even superintelligence itself.
Wow, that's quite a mix. Optimist with a go bag.
And the book talks about his reputation, the Michael Jordan of listening. the Usain Bolt of fundraising.
So incredibly skilled at deals and messaging.
That's the picture painted. Using listening skills to figure out what people want, then framing offers really effectively.
And his background, deep Silicon Valley roots, right? Y Combinator.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Pushing for 10x growth there, viewing YC as a de facto monopoly.
The source also mentions Paul Graham, the YC co-founder, and some of his controversial views.
It does touch on that.
Yeah.
Graham's stated views on meritocracy, including things he correlated with lower startup success, like having a strong foreign accent, which is obviously problematic. It painted a picture of the environment Altman came from.
Okay, but then the sources get into some really complex and frankly difficult personal territory.
Yeah, this is where it gets very challenging. The book includes accounts related to Sam's family, specifically from his sister Annie.
What's her account?
She describes seeking emergency financial help from Sam during a really severe crisis, housing insecurity, medical bills mounting up, turning to sex work after their father died.
That sounds incredibly tough.
The sources say she sought ongoing help, but Sam apparently declined an ongoing relationship, offered a lump sum or use of a house instead, though the exact terms seem disputed within the family, according to the source.
The feeling of a chasm, though, despite the money offer, that comes through.
That's what Annie describes, yeah. And then there are her public allegations against Sam and their brother Jack.
These are serious allegations.
Very serious. Sexual, physical, emotional, verbal, financial, and technological abuse. She made them public in a tweet back in 2021, and they resurfaced during the board crisis in late 2023.
And the sources suggest this wasn't entirely separate from leadership issues within OpenAI.
That's what the book implies, yeah. It details concerns from other leaders and directors about Altman's professional behavior patterns.
Like what?
Accounts of, well, manipulation, sometimes lying, agreeing to things, then bad-mouthing people, scattering information to keep control.
Kind of playing people off each other.
That seems to be the implication.
Yeah.
Also, attempting to bypass established release processes, like with GPT-4 Turbo, and just general dishonesty at times.
Making it hard to trust him.
That's what some individuals quoted in the source found, especially apparently after ChatGPT blew up and he was under immense pressure, reportedly exhausted and anxious.
And Mira Murati, another key leader, she reportedly shared concerns with the board.
Yes, the book says during the crisis, she told the board his behaviors were causing problems. Apparently even compared him unfavorably to Musk.
Interesting comparison.
It's like Musk was at least more direct, you know. She reportedly agreed with others, like the Amadeus siblings who'd left earlier over safety issues, about the fragmentation and control problems.
And the independent directors, they struggled too.
Big time, according to the sources. Struggled to get clarity, felt his actions were subtle, but formed a troubling pattern that stopped them doing proper oversight.
So their decision during the ouster wasn't just about one thing.
No, the book frames it as an assessment of his professional capacity to lead such a consequential company building AGI, given all these trust issues and questions about his suitability as the company matured.
Okay, let's shift to Ilya Sutskever, the core AI visionary.
Yeah, portrayed as a die-hard believer in deep learning, seeing artificial neurons as basically approximations of biological ones.
He had a lot of power early on.
Immense power as research director, prioritizing deep learning over pretty much everything else.
And known for some striking public statements.
Definitely. The sources mentioned things like tweeting that large neural nets might be slightly conscious.
Wow.
Boldly saying AGI would end all jobs, or that we'd soon have wildly effective AI therapy, often without much scientific backing presented right alongside the claim.
But then he shifted focus toward safety.
A big shift, yeah. Adopted these mantras like feel the AGI, called super alignment, their AI alignment effort, a blazing inferno.
Yeah.
Real urgency.
And he was key in the board crisis.
Absolutely pivotal, the sources reveal. He apparently went to board member Helen Toner with concerns about Altman's fitness to lead towards AGI.
Exciting.
Professional capacity issues, but also patterns he saw as abusive, explicitly mentioning the Amadeus situation and Sam's sister's allegations as a different kind of safety issue.
That's a heavy connection to make.
It is, and the book describes his intense emotional reaction when the company nearly dissolved and how he then flipped sides to back Altman's return. Showed how invested he was in OpenAI itself, his baby.
What about Greg Brockman, the CTO?
Champion of the startup clan, the book calls it. Focused on commercialization, the GPT-3 API, the super assistant idea.
Driven by a sense of mission, too, though.
Yeah, the sources mentioned him using the JFK NASA janitor story, feeling Americans needed to dream big again. But Mira Murati reportedly saw his dynamic with Altman as potentially disastrous. Adds another layer, right?
It does. And Mira Murati herself.
Rose through the ranks, a young technical woman in leadership, noted for navigating chaos growing up in Albania, learning calmness. Oversaw applied research, the crucial Microsoft relationship.
And her perspective during the crisis was important.
Very significant, according to the source material, acknowledging Altman's problematic behavior. Though, as the book notes, she did leave the company later, in September 2024.
Okay, this all leads into what the book calls the underbelly.
Yeah. The less visible costs, human, environmental, the labor exploitation side of things.
It introduces this concept of data colonialism. Can you unpack that?
Basically, it argues the AI industry extracts resources, creative work, user data, land, energy, water, and exploits global labor, all under this banner of progress.
Accelerating a kind of modern-day colonial world order.
That's the term used in the sources, yeah. It really forces you to ask, who is this progress actually for?
And it zeroes in on data annotation. Right. The work needed to train these models.
Exactly. Using firms like Sama in Kenya, Scale AI in Venezuela, places where economic desperation drives people to work for. Well, the source is astonishingly small amounts.
Fueling a race to the bottom.
Pretty much.
The Sama OpenAI contract details sound particularly harrowing.
They are. Kenyan workers hired reportedly for like $1.32 to $2 an hour.
That's incredibly low.
To review extremely graphic content, sexual abuse, violence, self-harm. To train AI filters.
The psychological toll must have been immense.
Devastating, according to the source's account of one worker, Mofado Kini. Mental breakdown, insomnia, relationship collapse because he couldn't even talk about the horrors he saw daily.
Did Sama respond?
They later claimed it was a pilot, terminated because content went outside the scope, and said they weren't fully paid. But the human cost described in the source is just stark.
And Scale AI in Venezuela. Similar story.
Similar dynamics. Strategy described as getting the best people for the cheapest amount possible led to falling wages, payment issues during Venezuela's crisis, exploitation fueled by desperation.
And beyond labor, the environmental cost.
Huge. The book talks about the startling carbon footprint of training large language models.
There was an analogy, right?
Yeah, one training run for a big model being like a round-trip flight, New York to San Francisco, in terms of carbon. And that's just one run. Factor in retraining, constant use, it adds up fast.
Plus the data centers themselves?
Massive mega campuses needing colossal energy. Like enough to power multiple cities the size of San Francisco.
Often from fossil fuels.
Often, yeah. And they need power 247, so that they keep running during disasters even when local communities lose power.
The source also connects this down the supply chain, lithium mining.
Right, for batteries.
Wow.
Highlights the impact in places like Chile depleting water, harming ecosystems like flamingo habitats, impacting indigenous communities.
Raising the same question again. Progress for whom?
Exactly. When the cost falls so heavily on vulnerable places and people.
Which brings us to safety, ethics, alternative paths.
Yeah, the book tracks how the safety debate itself shifted, from focusing mainly on future existential risk,
Skynet scenarios.
kind of, to acknowledging the very real present-day harms, bias in algorithms, social media amplification effects.
The source uses this term hate scaling laws.
Yeah, explaining that training on messy internet data doesn't just reflect bias, it amplifies it.
Examples.
Models labeling black faces as criminal more often, finding actual child sexual abuse material, CSAM, embedded in training data scraped from the web. Really disturbing stuff.
And the black box problem persists. We don't fully understand how they work.
Still a major issue.
Yeah.
Deep learning models learn in ways we can't easily interpret. Leads to unpredictable, sometimes dangerous behavior in new situations.
Like the example cited, Uber fatality, Tesla crashes, ChatGPT making up legal cases.
Precisely. And bigger models don't necessarily solve this. They can make it harder to predict.
What about openness? That GPT-2 decision seems pivotal.
It was. OpenAI decided not to release the full model, citing safety. But the sources argue this set a precedent,
Allowing others, like Google, to block critical research later.
contributing to less transparency overall, yeah. That's the argument.
And this intense race to scale up, did it squeeze out other types of AI research?
Reportedly, yes. It choked off alternative AI research paths that weren't just about building bigger and bigger models for commercial use. Limited the diversity of ideas.
Plus a lack of regulation compared to other industries.
A striking gap, the book points out. No specific safety or environmental ratings like we have for cars or appliances.
But the sources do offer hope, alternative visions.
They do, crucially.
Yeah.
Ideas like decolonial AI from Chile, resisting the imposition of a single Silicon Valley worldview.
And practical examples.
Te Haku's language preservation in New Zealand, building AI with the community, based on consent, reciprocity, data sovereignty, an ethical alternative model.
And groups like DARE, Timnit Gebru's organization.
Yeah, focusing on accountability research, benefiting marginalized communities, trying to refuse, interrogate, and reshape AI systems together. Plus, affinity groups like Black in AI, Queer in AI, all challenging the status quo.
These alternatives are important to highlight.
Absolutely. They show different futures are possible.
Okay, finally, the book touches on the ongoing turmoil after that board crisis in late 2023.
Yeah, the aftermath. A weakened safety team, key departures like Murati, McGrew, Zoff later in 2024, reports of firings for leaks, general disillusionment for some.
And more controversies kept popping up.
Seems so. Altman's reported plan for an AI chip company, seen by some as accelerationist. Microsoft acquiring Inflection AI, bringing on a leader some described as toxic.
And Microsoft eventually listing OpenAI as a competitor.
That was an interesting twist in the filings, yeah.
Will Lake's departure and public statements also made waves.
Big time. His tweets about safety culture taking a backseat to shiny products before he left for Anthropic really fueled public debate about those internal tensions.
And that whole non-disparagement agreement scandal.
Right, revealed by Kelsey Piper.
Yeah.
Employees allegedly risking vested equity if they didn't sign these lifelong NDAs, HR reportedly using equity as leverage.
Executives claimed ignorance.
But leaked documents contradicted that, according to the sources. This, plus the controversy around the Sky voice sounding like a celebrity they'd reportedly tried to hire. Right, Scarlett Johansson.
It all added to scrutiny about their candor, apparently impacting how policymakers viewed them.
So yeah, the sources suggest trust, internal and external, remains a central, ongoing challenge for them.
So let's try and bring this all together, this mini book podcast, diving into these excerpts. What's the big picture?
Well, it paints a story of, yes, incredible ambition, incredibly fast tech advancement, no doubt about that, but one that the book shows is just deeply tangled up with these fundamental ethical questions, major power struggles inside the company, and really significant human and environmental costs.
The source material seems to put that pursuit of AGI for humanity right next to practices described as extractive, exploitive.
Even colonial, using that term from the book.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question, doesn't it?
I think so. Given these tensions the book highlights between the stated mission and the reality, the labor issues, the internal stuff, the leadership controversies.
How should you evaluate that narrative? The story that AI development, as it's happening now in places like this, is genuinely, unequivocally for the benefit of all of humanity.
It's definitely something these sources compel you to think deeply about.